He froze in the doorway. Not because of fear. Not because of rage. But because his brain could not immediately process what his eyes were seeing. Ethan Whitmore, billionaire tech mogul, stood still as stone at the edge of the nursery, watching his infant son, Noah, latched at the breast of a woman who was not his wife. Naomi Carter. The housemaid. The help. The black woman he barely exchanged more than 3 words with in a week. She sat in the rocking chair, her shirt unbuttoned just enough for Noah to feed, her arms gentle but firm as they cradled his small body. Her eyes were closed, humming a quiet lullaby, completely unaware of the storm gathering at the door. "What the hell are you doing to my son?" His voice cracked through the room like a whip. Naomi's eyes snapped open. She didn't scream. She didn't jump. She simply looked at him, steady, unshaken, and gently detached the baby, burping him softly before rising to her feet. "He wouldn't eat," she said. "He's been rejecting the formula for days. He was dehydrated, lethargic." "You think this gives you permission?" Ethan snapped, his hands trembling. "You think you can touch my son? Feed him? Who gave you that right?" "I didn't plan this," Naomi said, voice calm but shaking at the edges. "I used to be a NICU nurse. I still produce milk." He latched on. He meted it. "You crossed a line." His jaw clenched. "You don't touch what's mine." Then, before he realized what he was doing, his hand struck her across the face. The slap rang louder than any lullaby. Noah whimpered, sensing the tension. Naomi didn't cry. She didn't flinch. She slowly turned, placed the baby back in the crib, and looked Ethan straight in the eye. "I saved your son," she said. "And you hit me for it." At that moment, the billionaire realized this wasn't about a boundary being crossed. It was about a boundary that never should have existed. And if he didn't fix what just broke, he wasn't just going to lose his maid. He was going to lose his son. Forever. Margaret Whitmore didn't need to hear the slap to know something had gone terribly wrong. She felt it, like a pulse in the walls, like a thread snapping in the quiet fabric of the house. She walked briskly toward the nursery, her cane tapping softly against the hardwood floors. When she reached the door, she saw Naomi standing still, one hand resting on her cheek, the other clutching the edge of the crib. Noah was nestled safely inside, sleeping peacefully as if unaware of the chaos that had just unraveled around him. Ethan stood near the window, fists clenched, his jaw rigid. "What happened here?" Margaret asked, her voice low but firm. Neither answered right away. Naomi turned slowly, her eyes sharp, unreadable. "I fed your grandson," she said. "He was starving. He hadn't eaten in almost 2 days. I gave him what he needed, because no one else would." Margaret glanced at her son. "Is that true?" Ethan didn't meet her eyes. He wasn't eating. The formula wasn't working. She took it upon herself. "She saved him," Naomi said quietly. "And he hit me for it." The silence that followed was thicker than anger. It was realization, slow, sinking, suffocating. Margaret looked at Naomi, then at Noah, then finally at Ethan. "Leave us," she said to him. Ethan hesitated. "Now." He walked out without a word. Margaret sat down in the rocking chair, the one Naomi had used just minutes earlier. She looked up at her, studying her, not with suspicion, but with something deeper, something closer to respect. "Tell me everything," she said. And Naomi did. About the bottle refusals. About the hours of crying. About her background as a neonatal nurse. About her own son, Elijah, who died because no one stepped in fast enough. Margaret said nothing for a long moment. Then she stood, walked over to the crib, and looked down at the sleeping child. "You did what none of us had the courage to do," she whispered. "You chose the child. And that changed everything." The house was quiet the next morning, but the silence wasn't peace. It was tension, hiding in the corners like dust that hadn't been swept in years. Naomi moved through the hallways with a calm she didn't quite feel. Her cheek still carried the faint outline of the slap. Not in color, but in memory. The kind of hurt that lived just beneath the skin. In the kitchen, whispers danced between the staff like wildfire. "She crossed a line," someone muttered behind a cupboard door. "I heard she's angling for more than just a paycheck," another said. "She's playing the long game," one of the younger maids, Kayla, chimed in, her tone coated in sugar but sharp like glass. 1 minute she's rocking the baby. Next thing you know, she's rocking herself into a will. Naomi heard it all. She paused at the doorway, adjusted the strap of her bag, and stepped inside. Kayla turned, her smile thin and calculated. "Morning, Naomi. Sleep well." Naomi didn't smile. She walked to the sink, poured herself a glass of water, and took a slow sip before answering. "Better than I expected. Considering how loud the snakes were hissing last night." The air stiffened. Kayla let out a forced laugh. "You really think feeding the boss's baby gives you the right to act like you run this house?" Naomi set the glass down gently, turned, and met her eyes. "No," she said. "Feeding that baby didn't give me any rights. But it saved his life. And that means something." Kayla folded her arms. "Don't pretend this wasn't about you. You saw an opportunity and took it. A pretty girl with a sad story. Happens all the time." Naomi stepped closer. Her voice stayed calm, but her words landed like bricks. "If I wanted to play the system, Kayla, I'd have called a lawyer the moment his hand hit my face. I'd own this damn house by now." Kayla's smirk cracked for just a second. Naomi leaned in, not threatening, just truth spoken too close for comfort. "I didn't come here to win anyone over. I came to work. But if standing up for a child threatens you, then maybe it's not me who's out of place." She turned and walked out, leaving behind the gossip, the glances, and a silence heavier than the one before. That night, Naomi couldn't sleep. The house was still. Even the walls seemed to be holding their breath. She sat on the edge of a small bed in her guest quarters, her fingers tracing the frayed edge of a photograph she kept tucked in her wallet. It was worn, bent at the corners, the colors faded. A little boy smiled up from the image, his front teeth missing, his hair in tight curls, arms wrapped around a plastic dinosaur. Elijah, her son. He would have been 5 this year. Naomi closed her eyes and remembered. Not just the hospital room, cold and overlit, but the way the nurse refused to listen when Naomi said something was wrong. The way the pediatrician brushed her off with a clinical smile. "He's just tired. Kids get cranky." She had begged for blood work, tests, anything. But she didn't have the right insurance. And she didn't have the right color skin to make them rush. By the time Elijah's fever spiked and he collapsed in her arms, it was too late. They called it an unfortunate delay in intervention. Naomi called it what it was, neglect. She buried him in a small cemetery on the south side of Chicago. No headstone, just a wooden marker with his name burned into it by hand. She couldn't afford anything more. But she came every Sunday, with fresh flowers, sometimes a toy. And she promised him, over and over again, "No child I ever meet will suffer like you did." So when she found Noah pale, whimpering, too weak to cry, something inside her snapped. Not with panic, but purpose, instinct. Elijah's face flashed in her mind like a flare in the dark. She had milk. She had the training. And she had a second chance. She had done what any mother would do, even if the child wasn't hers. Naomi opened her eyes again, the photo still resting in her hand. She slid it back into her wallet, pressed it closed, and exhaled slowly. People in that house might question her presence, her decisions, her past. But none of them had lived through the sound of a child's final breath. She had. And it was a sound she would never allow to happen again. Not if she could help it. Ethan Whitmore had always believed in logic. In clean data, efficient systems, calculated risk. He built a tech empire from nothing. Mastered markets, dominated boardrooms, made decisions in seconds that shifted millions. But parenting, that was chaos. That was waking up at 3 a.m. to cries he didn't know how to soothe. That was looking into eyes too small to judge him, but somehow still did. And after Claire died, he'd let the grief build a wall between him and his son. Now, that wall was crumbling. Because the woman he nearly fired, nearly destroyed, had made his son smile again. Ethan watched from the upstairs hallway that morning, unnoticed, as Naomi rocked Noah in the sunroom. Her voice was low, a hum beneath the sound of rain tapping gently against the window. Noah giggled, reaching for her nose with pudgy fingers. His skin had color again. His eyes tracked movement. He was alert, bright, alive. Ethan hadn't seen that in weeks. He didn't know how to approach her. What could he say? Sorry I slapped you after you saved my son? Sorry I let grief rot into anger and spill out on your skin? He walked into the kitchen and poured himself a coffee, black. He stared at it, untouched, watching the steam curl and vanish like excuses. Later, as Naomi passed through the hall with a basket of laundry, he stopped her. "Naomi," he said, voice lower than usual. She paused, cautious, but didn't look away. "I saw you with Noah," he continued. He laughed. "He hasn't done that in. I don't even know." She nodded once, silent. "I don't know how to fix what I did," he said. "But I see what you've done for him, and I want to start learning how to be better. For him." Naomi met his eyes. There was no softness there, but no hatred either. "You don't have to be perfect," she said quietly. "Just present." And with that, she walked on. Ethan stood alone in the hallway, the weight of her words settling deeper than he expected. He had failed as a husband, nearly failed as a father. But maybe, just maybe, there was still time to be something else. Something better. It started with a file Naomi wasn't meant to find. She had been looking for Noah's vaccination record in the back office, just routine housekeeping. But tucked between two folders was an older manila envelope, dusty, yellowed at the corners, and stamped with the name, Daniel Whitmore. She almost put it back. Almost. But something about the name clung to her like static. She opened it. Inside were medical records, handwritten notes, and one faded black and white photograph of a boy, maybe 7 or 8, smiling awkwardly beside a younger Ethan. Both wore matching sweaters. But it was the eyes that caught her. The same pale blue as Noah's. Same dimple on the left cheek. Naomi's breath caught. She waited until Noah was down for a nap before approaching Margaret on the garden terrace. "Margaret," she said, holding out the file. "Who is Daniel?" The older woman didn't take it right away. Her hands hovered over the envelope like it might burn her. Then she sighed. Deep. Heavy. "He was Ethan's older brother," she said quietly. "Born in 1978. Different from the start. Soft. Sensitive. Brilliant. But in a house like ours, that wasn't celebrated, it was corrected." Naomi sat beside her, saying nothing. "Back then," Margaret continued, her eyes on the horizon, "boys were supposed to be tough, stoic, like their father. Daniel cried during thunderstorms, painted in his journals, liked reading poetry, and one day, he just vanished." Naomi's voice was soft. "Vanished." Margaret nodded slowly. "They said he was sent to a school in Vermont. A facility. But I never saw him again. His name was never spoken." "Why?" "Because he embarrassed the family," Margaret said, a bitter edge in her tone. "And because Ethan's father believed perfection was the only acceptable legacy." Naomi clenched the file in her lap. "Claire knew," Margaret added. "Ethan's wife. She found traces of him. Letters. Records." She asked too many questions. Naomi turned to her. "You think that's why she died?" "I think Claire didn't die with all her answers," Margaret said. "And now those questions are yours." Naomi looked down at the photo again. A boy erased. A legacy buried. But now, finally, being unearthed. And she wasn't about to stop digging. They left at dawn. Ethan didn't speak much during the drive, his hands gripping the wheel tighter than necessary. Naomi sat beside him, a thick folder resting on her lap. Copies of the records, the photo, a hand-sketched map of the old facility Margaret had mentioned. The highway stretched out in front of them like a road back in time. The Vermont air was colder, sharper, as if the mountains themselves had secrets they weren't ready to give up. When they arrived at the facility, now a converted art therapy center for adults with developmental differences, they were met by a nurse named Carla, who looked at the photo Naomi showed her, then back at Ethan. "I knew him," Carla said. "We called him Daniel Graves. He was gentle, never caused trouble, painted a lot, mostly birds and water. But he left 6 years ago." Naomi leaned in. "Do you know where he went?" Carla hesitated. "He didn't say. But he used to get letters. From someone named Claire." Ethan's breath caught. "She used to send him books," Carla continued. "Poetry. Art journals. One day, he just packed his things, said he was ready to live on his own, and walked out. Quiet as a breeze. They spent the night in a small inn nearby, poring over what little information they had. A forwarding address on one envelope, half erased by time and handling, pointed them toward a town 2 hours south. The next morning, they followed the trail. It led them to a quiet neighborhood just outside Albany, New York. A small bookstore with ivy on the walls and a handmade sign that read Page and Willow. Through the window, Naomi spotted him. Daniel. Older now. His hair gray at the temples, thinner. But the eyes, they were the same. That softness. That spark. Ethan stood frozen on the sidewalk. "Do you want me to go first?" Naomi asked gently. He shook his head. "No. I need to." He pushed open the door. The bell chimed softly. Daniel looked up from a stack of books. For a moment, nothing happened. Then his face changed, recognition rising slow and certain. "Ethan," he said, voice fragile with disbelief. "It's me," Ethan whispered. "It's really me." Daniel stepped out from behind the counter. He reached out, trembling. "I thought you forgot." "I didn't," Ethan said, his voice breaking. "We buried you. But we were wrong." Naomi watched as the two men embraced, decades of silence collapsing into a single, breathless reunion. They sat together in the back room of the bookstore, surrounded by the scent of old paper and quiet memories. Daniel poured them each a cup of tea, chamomile, no sugar, just like Claire used to drink. He moved slowly, carefully, but there was a steadiness in his hands now. A sense of peace that only comes after years of surviving silence. "I didn't think I'd ever see anyone from that life again," Daniel said softly. Ethan leaned forward. "We thought you were dead. They told me you were sent away. And then nothing." Daniel nodded. "That was the plan. To disappear. For everyone's sake." "Whose plan?" Naomi asked gently. Daniel looked up, his eyes landing on her with quiet focus. "My father. He said I was broken. Too soft. Too strange. He didn't want me embarrassing the family name." Naomi's jaw tightened. "He called in favors," Daniel continued. "Doctors. Lawyers. The whole thing was sanitized. I wasn't committed. I was erased." Ethan rubbed his hands over his face, disbelief crashing down on him like waves. "I was only 10, he whispered. "I didn't know how to ask. And after Claire, after she died, everything just shut down." Daniel's expression changed at the mention of her name. "She came to visit me," he said. "Only once. She brought books. Talked to me like I was still human. I wasn't allowed visitors, but she found a way." Naomi leaned in. "Did she say anything about going public?" Daniel nodded slowly. "She told me she was collecting evidence. Letters. Documents. She said people needed to know what happened to me, and to others like me. But, a month later, the letters stopped. Then I heard she died." Silence fell over the room. Naomi felt it in her bones. This wasn't just a case of family shame. It was control. Suppression. "She didn't die without trying," Daniel said quietly. "She left pieces of the truth behind." Ethan looked up. "And now we found them." Naomi met his eyes. "Not all of them. Not yet." Daniel reached for a worn leather journal from the shelf beside him. "She gave me this," he said. "Told me to keep it safe in case someone ever came looking." He passed it to Naomi. "Looks like she was right." Naomi stayed up that night, long after Ethan had gone to bed. She sat at the desk in the inn's small room, Claire's journal open before her, lit only by the amber glow of a desk lamp. The pages were filled with delicate, precise handwriting, part poetry, part confession. Claire had been documenting everything. Appointments, names, times, conversations she wasn't supposed to hear. She wrote like someone preparing for war. Halfway through the journal, Naomi found a folded page. Different paper. Different ink. She unfolded it carefully. It was a typed letter, addressed to a reporter at the Philadelphia Chronicle. Dated just 2 weeks before Claire's car accident. Naomi read every word. "I believe my brother Daniel was wrongly committed under a false psychiatric evaluation, orchestrated by his own father to conceal what he saw as a family embarrassment. I have documents, eyewitness accounts, and a nurse who's willing to go on record. I'm afraid they'll try to stop me. If anything happens to me, know this, it wasn't an accident. It was a cover-up. Naomi's fingers trembled as she lowered the page. Claire hadn't just died in a crash. She had been silenced. The next morning, she showed Ethan the letter. He read it 3 times before speaking. She told me she was investigating something, he said, his voice hollow. I didn't take her seriously. I thought she was just grieving, obsessing. She was fighting for your brother, Naomi replied. And someone made sure she never finished. They drove back to the estate that afternoon, a different kind of silence hanging between them. Not anger. Not sadness. Resolve. At the house, Margaret was in the library. Naomi handed her the letter. She read it without blinking. I always feared, Margaret said slowly. Your father, he had powerful friends. Judges. Doctors. He kept things quiet. Always. I never imagined he'd. Her voice trailed off. But you knew something, Naomi pressed. Margaret met her gaze. I suspected. But suspicion isn't the same as proof. And proof, that puts a target on your back. Ethan stood beside them, eyes hard now. We have enough to go public. Margaret nodded. Then do it. But be ready. The family name won't protect you from the fire this time. Naomi folded the letter carefully and slipped it back into the journal. This isn't about names anymore, she said. This is about justice. Because Claire didn't die by chance. She was erased, just like Daniel. And now, the truth was waking up. Ethan stood in front of the mirror, adjusting his tie with fingers that felt like stone. He hadn't spoken in a press conference since Claire's funeral. Back then, his words were numb. Scripted. A eulogy forced through gritted teeth. Today, his words would be different. Real. Risky. Naomi stood outside the study, reviewing the digital scans one last time. The medical records. The letters. Claire's journal. Every piece of evidence now compiled, organized, and uploaded to a secure server. Ready to be sent to every major news outlet across the country. This is going to shake everything, she said quietly. Ethan nodded. It needs to. By mid-morning, reporters began arriving at the estate. A handful at first. Then a swarm. Microphones, cameras, questions flying before he even stepped outside. They set up the podium in the front garden, where the roses Claire planted still bloomed in stubborn defiance. Ethan stepped up. Naomi stood behind him. So did Margaret. And Daniel, his first time in public in over 30 years. Ethan cleared his throat. The crowd hushed. My name is Ethan Whitmore, he began. And today, I'm here to tell the truth about the lies that shaped my family. He spoke slowly, clearly. About Daniel. About the false commitment. About Claire's investigation. About the letter. The warning. The silence that followed her death. He didn't dramatize. He didn't cry. He just told the truth. And the truth, for once, was enough. Gasps echoed through the crowd when Daniel stepped forward and confirmed it all. His calm voice, steady but emotional, broke through the noise of flashing cameras and whispered disbelief. Naomi followed, reading the final paragraph from Claire's letter out loud. If anything happens to me, know this, it wasn't an accident. It was a cover-up. The press conference ended in silence, not applause. And that, Naomi thought, was how you knew the truth had landed. Inside, Margaret closed the front door behind them, her expression unreadable. That was brave, she told Ethan. No, he replied, glancing toward Naomi. That was overdue. By sunset, the story had hit every major outlet. Cable news. Online headlines. Social media exploded. Hashtag Justice for Claire began trending nationwide. But for the Whitmore family, it wasn't about headlines. It was about letting the truth breathe, for the first time in decades. And this time, no one could smother it. The house felt different now. Not quieter, but clearer, like someone had finally opened all the windows after years of stale air. Light poured through the halls that had once been shadows. Not because the sun was stronger, but because the truth had taken root. Ethan stood at the nursery door, watching Naomi feed Noah. The child rested peacefully in her arms, his tiny fingers curled around hers like he never wanted to let go. And in many ways, neither did Ethan. She had saved his son, exposed his family's darkest history, and through it all, she had remained grounded, not asking for recognition, not seeking reward, just steady, present. Naomi glanced up, sensing him. "He's finally sleeping through the night," she said softly. "Took a while, but he's settled now." Ethan stepped inside. "Thanks to you." Naomi smiled faintly, brushing a curl from Noah's forehead. "Thanks to all of us." Ethan reached into his jacket and pulled out a folded document. "I had it drawn up this morning," he said. "It's official. Legal. You're now Noah's guardian in the event anything happens to me. Medical decisions, schooling, everything." Naomi stared at the paper, stunned. "You're sure?" "I've never been more sure of anything," he said. "You've done more for him in 3 months than I did in the first year." Her eyes shimmered, but she didn't let the tears fall. "I'll do right by him," she said. "I know," Ethan replied. "And I'd like you to stay. Not just as staff. Not as help. As family." Naomi looked down at Noah. Then back at Ethan. "I'll stay," she said. "But not for the title. For the child. Always," he said. Later that evening, the Whitmores sat around the dinner table, not as employer and employee, not as broken fragments of old wealth, but as people trying to rebuild something honest. Daniel passed the bread. Margaret poured the wine. Naomi cradled Noah in her lap, humming gently under her breath. And Ethan, for the first time in years, felt like a father. Not because he had given life, but because he had finally learned how to protect it. This family, born in scandal and silence, was no longer hiding. They were breathing again. Together. Sometimes, the most powerful thing we can do is listen. Not to the loudest voice in the room. Not to the one with the money, or the title, or the reputation. But to the whisper that almost gets drowned out. The one wrapped in grief, in quiet strength, in inconvenient truth. Naomi Carter had no intention of becoming a symbol. She came to the Whitmore estate to work. To clean floors, fold linens, and blend into the background. She didn't ask to raise someone else's child. She didn't ask to uncover buried secrets. And she certainly didn't ask to be struck for doing what came naturally to a mother. But she stayed. Not because the pay was good. Not because she wanted recognition. She stayed because a child needed her. And in choosing love over fear, action over silence, Naomi did more than save a life. She healed a family. She reminded them that legacy isn't built by hiding flaws behind closed doors. It's built by facing the broken pieces and choosing to put them back together, honestly. In a world that often rewards appearances, Naomi chose truth. And because of that, a man reclaimed his brother. A child kept his mother figure. And a family, long fractured by ego and shame, learned how to breathe again. That's the thing about healing. It doesn't come with applause. It doesn't trend. It doesn't always look like victory. Sometimes, it looks like a woman holding a baby in the early morning light. Sometimes, it sounds like a father whispering, "I'm sorry," and meaning it. Sometimes, it feels like an old photo finally being hung on the wall where it always should have been. Naomi never wore a cape. She never raised her voice. But she stood her ground. And in doing so, she became the kind of hero we rarely recognize, but desperately need. So if you've ever felt like your truth didn't matter, let this story remind you. The world may not be listening at first. But when you speak with heart, and stand with purpose, it can't help but hear you.